The clock struck 5:36 p.m. in Anchorage, Alaska, on Good Friday of 1964. A lone radio operator prepared for his shift before a 9.2 magnitude monster struck. However, this calm afternoon would soon transform into as the pavement split into jagged, hungry mouths. The young state's foundation began to liquefy and slide toward the abyss. This is the story of a desperate vigil held while the most powerful earthquake in North American history tore the world apart. For 4 minutes and 38 seconds, the earth did not merely shake. It buckled, heaved, and groaned with a primal violence that defied human comprehension. In downtown Anchorage, the bustling storefronts of 4th Avenue didn't just crumble. The entire street dropped 11 feet in a single, sickening lurch, swallowing cars and trapping civilians in a landscape that looked more like a bombed-out war zone than a modern American city. In the affluent Turnagain Arm neighborhood, 75 homes were pulverized as the land beneath them turned to quicksand and slid into the silty waters of the Cook Inlet. Communications vanished in a heartbeat. Transcontinental phone lines snapped, undersea cables hissed into the icy silence of the North Pacific, and commercial power Anchorage, along with 185,000 square miles of the surrounding territory, was suddenly and violent. In the suffocating, dusty darkness that followed the main shock, a terrifying realization set in. There was no way to call for help, and no way for the world. The great land was alone, buried under the wreckage of its own geography, waiting for a single frequency to pierce the void. The dust had barely settled over the twisted ruins of 4th Avenue when a profound, terrifying, the rhythmic hum of a modern city had been replaced by the hiss of broken gas lines and the distant, low groans of the shifting earth. In this sudden void, the first governor of Alaska, William A. Hagen, found himself presiding over a state that had effectively been severed from the rest of the world. Landlines were dead. The undersea cables that tethered the young state to the lower. Into this darkness stepped a woman whose name would soon become synonymous with hope. Genie Chance. A broadcast journalist for KENI Radio, Genie was not merely a reporter that evening. She became the connective tissue of a broken civilization. Making her way through the buckled streets to the Anchorage Public Safety Building, she found a city in shock. By 6:30 p.m., less than an hour after the final tremor subsided, Genie discovered that KENI's transmitter remained functional, humming to life on emergency power. She picked up the microphone and began to speak, her voice steady, calm, and unmistakably authoritative. It was a lifeline thrown into a turbulent sea. Supporting her in the shadows was her husband, Bill Chance. As a civil defense worker, Bill he refused to let the darkness win, laboring alongside Genie to transform a simple radio station into a makeshift command center. But they were not alone in this electronic wilderness. As commercial channels failed, a brotherhood of amateur ham radio operators, known collectively as the Alaska Net, began to flicker to life in these operators, using nothing but vacuum tubes and wire antennas, became the only bridge across the Gulf of Alaska and the rugged peaks of the Rockies. While Mayor George Sherrock struggled to gauge the extent of the carnage in Anchorage, these hobbyists were already relaying the first frantic reports from the outside world. This was the voice in the dark, a decentralized web of citizen sentinels who refused to let Alaska drift into isolation. There was a profound grit to their work, a quiet determination as they bypassed the broken infrastructure of the 20th century, using the resilient frequencies of the airwaves. Together with Genie and Bill, they began the monumental task of organizing the chaos, turning a technical catastrophe into a coordinated vigil that would define the resilience of the last frontier. They were the ears of the state when the world had gone deaf, and the mouth of the people when all other avenues were buried under tons of glacial silt and debris. But the most shocking, Genie Chance sat in the cramped, shadowed quarters of the Anchorage Public Safety Building, the sharp smell of stale coffee and cigarette smoke hanging heavy in the chilled air. Outside, the world was a jagged ruin of shattered asphalt and pitch darkness, but inside, The flickering glow of the radio console was the only North Star the survivors had left. For 59 consecutive hours, Genie refused to leave her post at the KENI radio microphone. Her voice, once familiar to Alaskans as a friendly midday companion, it was a measured, calm cadence that betrayed none of the bone-deep terror she surely felt as her husband, Bill Chance, moved through the wreckage as a civil defense worker. The emergency generators hummed a low, vibrating chord in the basement, a constant reminder of how precarious their connection to the outside world truly was. This was the radio vigil, a desperate person-to-person lifeline that bypassed the severed telephone lines and the snapped undersea cables. To anyone in Seward, she would say, her voice steady despite the dark circles under her eyes, please tell the family of Mary Jensen that she is safe in Anchorage. But hour after hour, the messages poured in. Thousands of handwritten scraps of paper representing fractured families begging for a single syllable of hope. While Genie held the local front at KENI, the cold night air above the frozen Alaskan tundra was alive with the known collectively as the Alaska Net. These amateur enthusiasts became the state's central nervous system during its darkest hour. In darkened basements and cramped sheds from Fairbanks to Juneau, they hunched over their shortwave sets, bouncing signals off the ionosphere to relay news to the lower 48 states. They were the ones who informed the Pentagon, the Red Cross, and panicked relatives in California and Oregon that Alaska was still standing, even as the second night bled into the third morning. The fatigue was more than physical. It was the heavy emotional weight of being the final gatekeeper for an entire civilization in crisis. Yet, Genie and the band of operators pushed on through the haze of exhaustion, their vigil a testament to the belief that as long as a human voice remained on the air, the disaster had not yet won. In those 59 hours, the radio transformed from a medium of entertainment into a sacred bond of survival, proving that even when the Earth itself fails, the human connection remains unbreakable. While Genie Chance's voice offered a lifeline to the residents of Anchorage, a much darker silence was falling over the rugged. In the immediate wake of the 4-minute convulsion, the very coastline of Alaska began to tear itself apart in a sequence of events that defied human experience. This was not the creeping tide of a distant storm, but a series of localized, monstrous tsunamis triggered by massive underwater landslides and the sudden, violent displacement of the seafloor. In the Sugpiaq village of Turnagain, a community that had lived in harmony with the tides for generations, the survivors of the shaking barely had time to catch their breath. The water pulled back with a guttural roar, exposing the kelp-strewn floor of the bay and leaving fish flopping in the mud. Moments later, a wall of black water surged back with impossible velocity. Within minutes, 23 people, nearly 1/3 of the village's population, were swept away into the frigid, churning depths of the North Pacific. For the Alutiiq family, every building in Turnagain was erased by the force of the surge, leaving only the schoolhouse and a single residence standing as lonely, battered sentinels over a landscape of debris and unbearable grief. But what investigators discovered next changed everything. The localized devastation at Turnagain was mirrored across the entirety of Prince William Sound, from the shattered docks of Whittier to the doomed waterfront of Valdez. At Shoup Bay, the water rose to a staggering 220 feet, a mountainous surge of energy that stripped the ancient timber from the hillsides as if the trees were mere matchsticks. It was a visceral display of the Earth's hidden power, one that had, as the waters eventually receded, they revealed a state transformed beyond recognition by the raw mechanics of the planet. The massive tectonic forces had thrust portions of the crust upward by as much as 38 feet, leaving wharves and fishing piers dangling uselessly in the air, miles from the new shoreline. In other regions, the ground had subsided or sank, dropping as much as 8 feet and allowing the salt water to rush in and drown once vibrant forests. These areas are still marked today by ghost trees, the bleached skeletal remains of hemlock and spruce that stand as silent silver tombs. The very foundations of the North American continent had shifted, redrawing the map of the youngest American state in a single afternoon. The survivors in these remote coastal villages, many accessible only by sea or air, were left to mourn their dead in a world that had literally moved beneath their feet, leaving geological and cultural scars. When the shaking finally ceased and the radio waves of the Alaska net eventually fell silent, the landscape of both the Earth and human safety had been permanently altered. In the quiet that followed the roar of the 9.2 magnitude upheaval, a geologist named Dr. George Plafker stepped into the fractured, salt-crusted terrain of Prince William Sound. His post-quake fieldwork for the United States Geological Survey would do more than just map the destruction. It would provide the definitive evidence for the theory of plate tectonics. By documenting areas where the crust had vaulted 38 feet upward and others where it had subsided 8 feet into the sea, Plafker proved the existence of the Aleutian subduction zone. His work transformed a nascent scientific hypothesis into the foundational law of modern seismology, forever changing how we understand the restless, grinding plates of the planet beneath our feet. But the legacy was written in concrete and law as much as in scientific journals. The staggering $311 million in property loss, a figure exceeding $3 billion in today's currency, forced a total reckoning of how we build on man. From the shattered remains of Anchorage's 4th Avenue and the ruins of the Turnagain Arm neighborhood, modern seismic engineering was born. This disaster ushered in strict building codes designed to withstand the violent liquefaction of northern soils. Furthermore, to ensure that never again would a wall of water catch the Pacific coast unawares, the West Coast and Alaska Tsunami Warning Center was established, creating a shield of sensors and rapid alert protocol. For the people of the North, the scars required a different kind of rebuilding. Some wounds were too deep to patch. The entire town of Valdez was abandoned, its foundations deemed too unstable to trust, and the community was moved. The Sugpiaq people of Chenega, who lost nearly a third of their residents to the localized tsunamis, saw their ancestral home vanish. They would not officially resettle in the area until 1984 at Turnagain Bay. Yet, perhaps the most enduring ghost of the Great Alaska Quake lives in the magnetic tape archives of the University of Alaska. There, the calm, steady, her 59-hour vigil created the very blueprint for modern crisis communication, proving that in the face of total isolation, the most vital infrastructure is the human voice reaching out through the dark. History has more secrets to reveal. Subscribe and hit the bell. Share this with someone who loves history.